Arcuative Medical, Amr Saleh, who is the founder and CEO of Shifamed, where he's incubated, spun out, and successfully exited several med device companies. And finally, Mehrdad Faranyai, an industry veteran for over 20 years since he left NASA and joined us on the med tech side, has seen several successful exits. He's currently the CEO and founder of Track Medical. Mehrdad, I'd like to start with you. Previously, you founded and ran Roxwood, where you strategically had planned to exit after getting regulatory approval and early market validation, but that's not how it played out. Can you tell us about the company and the crisis you faced when you thought you were about to get an acquisition?
Sure, thanks so much. Great joining everyone here, including you, John. I think as far as crisis management, that's something probably within this group, there's plenty of scar tissue of, crisis that this group has, overcome, probably on a startup side, probably on a monthly, if not weekly basis, you go through some sort of issue. But I was going to focus more on existential crises, which for Roxwood was more focused on finances. And stepping back a bit, Roxwood was a company founded on tools for complex cardiovascular type devices. And, it was considered somewhat more specialty. So traditional VCs, couldn't attract quite the typical traditional VCs. And we ended up having more focusing on, as far as the investors that we got, were more individual investors, high net worth, family funds, et cetera. And which kind of lent itself, and we ran the company really more like a small business, and from the get-go, and trying to hustle and trying to make our way through it with the traditional premise of, get the products, get it developed, get some initial traction, and attract, strategics as for potential acquisitions. And more or less, that's how it played out. We ended up ultimately having 7 approved products over 5 years. And we were an open book. I kept strategics engaged from day one. And I think we had, for the most part, we had quite a bit of interest, but it was never quite enough to get over the hump. And after about 5 years, where we had generated some good traction, modest but good, solid traction with the products, we'd finally, I think, come to a point where I think we had checked off all the boxes. In this case, particularly with Abbott, which was, one of the biggest players in our field, and had been really the front runner for us throughout. I'd been talking to him the entire 5 years, and as I was with most of them. And finally, with plenty of diligence, having gone through multiple reorgs on their side with their senior management teams, I think all the ducks were aligned and it looked like we were coming together for a deal. And just as that was happening, they announced a acquisition of St. Jude for nearly $30 billion, which put a hold on virtually all other M&A activities, as they mentioned, for the next couple of years. So we were stuck with
nothing to do with Roxwood or all the work you had done to get them on board. Suddenly, totally out of your control, the gate was closed.
Yeah, and they were fantastic. They were great. They said, "Hey, listen, our hands are tied." The way someone had put it, several of their senior management, they said, you were on the runway, you were cleared for takeoff, everything was looking good as you're taxiing out. The airport is closed for the next 2 years, so you can't take off. Our apologies. So, we were left with limited runway, and by now, 5 years in, our investors were starting to get long in the tooth, and it was things were not looking good. And I circled back with them, with Abbott, and they with me really, as far as potentially putting together a distribution deal. This is something that we had shied away from. There's a poor track record, I would say, with distribution deals in the medtech space for lots of reasons, and we knew all of those. And I think we had overcome what traditionally would have been some issues. We had already generated some traction. We already had a breadth of products, and we kind of had a small installed base. And there was a lot of interest, I got to give them credit, to their commercial management team, to putting real effort behind it. And we came together and it worked out. It was, something that we had put together, both as far as them putting in some capital into the company, which was desperately needed, as well as putting the commercial effort behind it to be able to generate that visibility for us, to be able to get some traction in the field. We had gone from, like I said, we ran as a small company, as a small business really, and never hired clinical, never hired marketing. We never had more than 3 or 4 folks in the field. And yet we had, had a breadth of products, and we're desperately looking for that oxygen to really feed the product line to be able to get it out there. And
you pivoted with Abbott and got a distribution deal, but didn't you set up more than that deal?
we had the predecessor to that, we had set up with Biotronic in Europe, and that had really worked out well for us. We just, like I said, we didn't have the commercial bandwidth. We didn't have the traditional VCs to really fund expanding commercially. So we had looked for other ways of being a little more creative on expanding commercially, and working with Biotronic in Europe and with Nipro. And we had gotten approval for our products in all 3 geographical areas. And those, especially the deal with Biotronic, kind of proved that when there was a real commercial strategic, putting commercial effort into it, the products really would do well. And that was kind of the predecessor to, for us, the monster field was location was the US. And that led to that with Abbott, which, like I said, as we put it together, it took a while, but on the first month of a soft launch, they opened 50 accounts, which for us was amazing. We had gone from 3 reps in the field to over 200, almost overnight, relatively speaking, which caused its own crises. Obviously, as you can imagine, operationally, that's maybe for another time. But we were able to hustle our way through it to make that work.
So that's great. So you didn't get the acquisition you thought was right there on the table. You pivoted and set up all these distribution deals, which showed the product had legs in the market. And then what was the final outcome for Roxwood?
So ironically, I think that was a certain level of validation that a company of less than 20 people could attract a company like Abbott. And with that came some interest from somewhat, I would say, outside our traditional space. And suddenly we had a bid to acquire the company. Again, that took actually that worked out quite quickly, but just as we were getting going with Abbott, there was interest that came in from outside. And I would credit that, ironically, somewhat with that, due to that distribution as a deal with Abbott, as maybe potentially giving some credence to validating us as a company. So within less than 6 months from starting that distribution deal, we closed an acquisition with a company called BTG, which is now ultimately part of Boston Scientific.
Well, that's a great outcome. What a fantastic pivot to de-risking your market adoption, setting up the distribution agreement deals, and then attracting other buyers when Abbott was off the table. Thank you for that. Now I want to turn to Tom. Tom asked, so a couple years ago you sold spinal kinetics to Orthofix, but it wasn't a straight path to the exit for you either. Can you tell us about all the challenges you had to navigate? You're on mute. Tom, you're on mute. There you go.
Work? Okay, sorry about that. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, John. As John mentioned, I was the CEO and also the founder of Spinal Kinetics. I founded the company in late 2003, and we initiated product development with our first round of funding in early 2004. We submitted, as all companies have to the FDA in 2006. And after that, we hit a number of turbulent events that came on us all pretty much within a 1-year period. I'd like to preface my talk first with the giving a perspective on the FDA between 2004 and 2010. It was one of the most onerous times, and it's well documented from a number of studies that during that time period, the FDA had one of the lowest approval or clearances for 510Ks and PMAs, and the discussions around getting even studies started was very difficult. And that's where we ran into our first problem when we submitted in late summer of 2006 to get PMA or a pivotal trial approval for our PMA. That's when our troubles actually started. It took about a year and a half. I'm sorry.
No, I remember, Tom. I remember those times and how challenging it was with the FDA. I think even you did a post-mortem at NAS in 2012. I think you showed that out of about 185 companies that got VC funding in the previous decade, that there were only 25 still standing. And the majority of those had to fold because of FDA challenges and delays, and they ran through money trying to make it through the FDA minefield.
Yeah, that's correct. There was, especially in the orthopedic and spine industry, we got hit fairly hard. We initiated our discussions with them with a pre-submission meetings, et cetera, as most companies do. We went through the process of discussing a pivotal trial, design, all the things. We made the final submission at the request of the FDA. And then when they actually provided us the approval, they let us know that within the last 48 hours before they gave us the letter, we had to initiate a feasibility trial, which kind of threw us for a loop. That feasibility trial, obviously, we weren't expecting it. They never mentioned it, but we realized it was about a 2-year delay and millions of dollars in costs associated with something that was completely unplanned, unanticipated, and was never in the discussion process.
So that's a big hiccup, but that's not the only thing that hit you.
Yeah, so we initiated our feasibility study because we didn't really have a choice in March of 2008. And then in September 2008, as we were progressing and we had our interim 6-month report, they came back and threw a bunch more stuff on us, okay? So that extended it even more and cost more. So we immediately said, we got to go fundraising, started our program, got our pitch deck together, immediately went fundraising starting in mid-September 2008. And we all know October 2008, the financial markets collapsed. So no VC wanted to talk to us thereafter. So we were in the mode of, okay, what do we do now? We basically have to ride this out. We had enough cash in the bank to potentially ride it out for a period of time. So we went and anticipating that we could ride this out. But 6 weeks later, after the market crash, we got hit with a intellectual property lawsuit from one of the biggest orthopedic companies there is. And that was also unanticipated. So we got hit all within about a month in September, October, November timeframe, or 3 months, with the FDA issues, with the market collapsing and pretty much stopping our fundraising efforts, and then an intellectual property lawsuit, which obviously then makes the fundraising effort even more difficult. So our lawyers told us that we could probably get this thing resolved fairly quickly. So we went forward, continued with the feasibility trial, stopped the fundraising efforts, and then just try to focus on collecting data off the feasibility trial and some clinics we had in Germany. But during that next 10 months, this large law firm or orthopedic company, pretty much every other month kept on filing additional lawsuits. So by the end of it, in the September, October 2009 timeframe, we had 6 major lawsuits. And not only did they do that all in the United States, but they expanded it into the European Patent Court, the German Patent Court, and having 3 different venues for a small company in terms of costs, in terms of resources, with all the other stuff that we had to do was completely exasperating.
It sounds like a showstopper. Like, what'd you end up doing?
Well, when we got hit with the last lawsuit in the September timeframe, we recalibrated the company. We had to call a emergency meeting. I called an emergency meeting with the team, the executive team, and said we have to go through a whole process of crisis management, laying off people. Some of them of the management team would be laid off, and then we have to focus on trying to figure out how to survive. We had about $8.5 to $9 million left in the bank. Our existing investors told us no more money was coming in from them. We knew fundraising from outside was not going to happen. So basically, our future was based on what we could achieve with the money that we had left off. At the end of the day, it just came down, what limbs are you going to cut off to survive? That's the basic decision process we had to go through. And at the end of it, the management team, we decided that we were going to lay off more than 50% of the team. We presented that to the board. We also presented to the board some plans that we did not expect to do, which was go internationally into marketing commercialization to try to get revenue, figure out how to reduce cost of goods to increase margin, and go through a very heavy cost-cutting measures within the organization. We presented that to the board. They accepted with all the packages for the employees to reduce the force. Unfortunately, this all happened the week of Thanksgiving in 2009. So during that week, we had to make the plans, make the decisions, board meeting the Monday after Thanksgiving to get the approval, employee meeting on Tuesday to let the organization know. But the biggest thing that we made sure was to communicate and over communicate to the employees and help them thereafter, immediately in the afternoon of the employee meeting, where we informed the people that were getting terminated, that we would help them get jobs. And one of the things that we did was the management team got on the phone for the next couple of days, and pretty much everybody, the 50% that got laid off, I'm proud to say that about 100% got employed within a month.
Yeah, I remember that because I was one of those calls you made, and I scooped up a couple of your good people.
Exactly.
I'm happy to take them, but that's just a fantastic demonstration of leadership, that you're helping out these employees to find new opportunities. And, I'm sure that helped you retain the people who were staying, and helped with the survival of the company, so they weren't distracted by, what's the next shoe you're going to drop, and were they looking for another job, since you showed you're going to take care of them. But I'd like to come back to how that played out with you, and get Amr to jump into the conversation for a little bit here, if I can, Tom. And we'll get back to what happened with Spinal Kinetics in a minute. Amr, you've been, very successful with the ShifaMed model, so much so that you're kind of making med tech startups look easy. But I'm sure this, global pandemic has even been keeping you up at night. What impact has this crisis had on your businesses?
First, good morning. Thanks very much, John, for the kind words. So for us, really, the latest crisis with the COVID really was super challenging, certainly at the beginning. We didn't know when this was going to sort of finish, and how long was the shelter in place was going to stay, and so forth. So the first thing we had to do was make sure people were safe and whatnot. So we had everybody work remotely. And certainly, as you can imagine, a lot of engineers can work remotely, and I think that's the experience of probably most of us around, how to leverage Zoom and so forth. So we did that. And then we started sort of keep on pushing in that direction. So we had IT support everybody in their homes. We had engineers bring equipment to their homes, started building stuff there. We had technicians building valves at home. And that really sort of allowed us to survive, I would say. Not thrive, but certainly made up for a lot of otherwise would have been a total disaster. We're still quite stressed, but we were making reasonable progress. We did have to furlough some people. There are some people who just couldn't work. And then people were we allowed people to go to work in staggered fashions and in separated ways and so forth. So some minimum amount of activities started to take place. And the next sort of issue that we had to deal with was, well, what do we do now, right? Some of our companies had a specific set of goals. How much money they needed was sort of calculated based on what they intended to accomplish and so forth. And all of those plans now were up in the air. You can't do clinical cases. So we had to raise money in the middle of the crisis. And we started that process. And then we saw the PPP. We said, oh, this is great. It will save us. We submitted our application, struggled to fight and see if we can get in there. There's a lot of back and forth. And we got it. We said, great. So we brought people back from furlough. The government is going to help us. We're part of, we qualified and everything was great. And then things changed. Our circumstances changed for the better, actually. And more importantly, the rules changed. So when we finally got the PPP money, we exceeded the $2 million threshold. And it's pretty clear that you had to be totally desperate to use that money. The government was going to audit us. And we certainly didn't feel like we were qualified, and the rules basically made it that we wouldn't qualify or it would be pretty risky. So we returned the money. We kept people back on work, but things started to turn around. We reached out to our angel network to raise money for at least one of the companies, and they came through. We talked to our investors, and some of them also came through, and then some new investors came through. So we're actually able to raise some of the monies that we needed to survive. But most sort of important, exciting thing that happened to us is that one of the biggest things that we're really literally had catheters in Paraguay, getting ready to do our first in human for Novera. This is the ultrasound catheter. And we can't travel anymore, and they're not doing elective procedures. But just literally this Friday, we did our first in Zoom. We did our first in human remotely. None of the team members were there. We never actually managed to go to the site. We trained them remotely, and they did it remotely with our support from Zoom. And others have done that. So we've done 3 cases so far, and we're pretty excited about the results. So that's sort of our story. We stuck with it.
Right. That's a new bar, Amr, for how solid your design and prototype is ready for the clinic. If it can work via Zoom, you've achieved a new level.
We're fortunate that way.
That's great. Fantastic story. Thanks. So Eric, we haven't given you a chance to talk yet. A year ago, you made a big shift by kind of lateral move from pure medical device into the diagnostic area. Took a new role where you're running Lucria Health now. But I understand that you've made a major shift with this coronavirus. Tell us about it.
Right, John. Thanks very much for inviting me into this existential threat therapy session. I feel a lot better now after hearing some of the stories. By the way, we also applied for PPP and then pulled out once we saw the rules evolve. So Amr, I hear you on that one. So Lucira Health is a diagnostic, a molecular diagnostic. So for those who are unfamiliar, that means that we're looking at the genetic material and we're targeting certain gene targets in making our diagnostics. So this is the kind of technology that's used in hospital labs. It's very accurate. And the team at Lucira has transformed that technology into a tiny, inexpensive to produce disposable. And the idea is to make this available over the counter. So it can be used for diagnostics of infections throughout the body, but our target is respiratory. And we were pursuing a home influenza test. Most people, when they feel crappy from flu or whatever, wait 3 to 5 days before going to the doctor. But there are antivirals now, Tamiflu and Xofluza are examples from Roche, that if taken in the first 48 hours can reduce the severity of the flu. So you really want to know right away. Physicians don't want flu patients coming to their office, and flu patients don't really feel great themselves and are not that mobile. most people also in the first 48 hours will go to the drugstore and buy all sorts of symptom reduction meds. So we plan to be on the shelf, and you could go to the drugstore and pick this up, swab not deep in the nose, but in the front of the nose, and know in 20 minutes at home with a digital answer, yes, no, whether or not you have the flu. So we were busy bringing that to market, and then the COVID pandemic came about. And we went through a few weeks of should we or shouldn't we? Should we or shouldn't we? And finally, we peeled off a very small group in our assay department, and they went through the bioinformatics and we came up with our own targets on the COVID virus that are proving out to be very reliable so far, and so much so that we've shifted the company. So we've done a pivot here now, and we're planning to bring a COVID assay, which will again swab the front of the nose, and in 30 minutes you'll know on the spot if you're actively infected and shedding virus or not. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of interest. The demand is huge, and so our challenge is to scale fast enough now. This is
So
kind of
you plan to have this on the shelf at CVS, Walgreens, et cetera?
That's the plan. Yeah. So there will be a few steps, commercial steps, in getting to that point, but that's what we intend to do, and then we'll follow with the flu program and with other respiratory diseases.
And where are you with the emergency use authorization from the FDA on your?
Yeah, so we're interacting with the FDA. The goalposts have been moving a little bit as they're getting pressure from both sides of the aisle in DC. But we'll plan to be through that in the next couple of months.
Great. And when you say the goalposts moving, the code for that is that they're making the tests much more accurate and sensitive and specific to get approval than they were a month ago. Is that correct?
That's what they're attempting to do. Some tests got let through that. So limit of detection is really the metric here. Yeah. And some tests got through that didn't have low enough LOD. And so now they're trying to find ways to assure that the LOD is where it needs to be.
Yeah, I know I've got a few colleagues last week that went into scare mode because some gentleman's daughter got tested, and so everybody went out, did the fast Quatel test, and some of them positive, some of them negative, but when they had the longer term PCR, all of them were negative. So yes, there's a lot of false positives with the poor sensitivity there. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. It sounds very exciting. We're all ready for you to get it out there, Eric, so we can go and pick up the test. I think that's very needed. Thanks. Well, hey, I'd like to get back to Tom now. Tom, you had to totally pivot with Spinal Kinetics. You got hit by a trifecta of crisis that could sink any one company if any one of those hit you, and you decided to grow revenue. Tell us what happened.
Well, after the reduction in force, and as you mentioned, I think the way we handled it kept the rest of the team in place. So that would have been even a further disaster if we had attrition. But pretty much everybody stayed. We immediately went into stopping the development, just supporting the feasibility trial, and then focused all resources on something that, as I mentioned, we had not intended to do, which was launch in Europe. So I immediately went to Europe. Specifically to Germany. I had a lot of contacts in the orthopedic spine. I hired a team immediately of 7 people, and they started January of 2010. We immediately started pushing sales, not only in Germany, but started to expand in other countries. We set up subsidiaries also in Switzerland and in France to hire agents, not to go direct. We only went direct in the German market and then put on distributors into other markets. By the end of 2010, we had about 5 or 6 countries in Europe that we were covering. The German operation actually became very beneficial for us because we went into an aggressive marketing commercialization mode. In our first year, we did over 8 million in sales. At the beginning, our margin was about 30%. We went into heavy cost reduction mode for COGS and focused on that. At the beginning of 2011, we were getting in the 60, and at the end, mid 2010, we were in the mid 70% gross margins, which all helped us. We actually became cash flow positive in May of 2011 with this process. So cost cutting, focused on commercial sales. By the end of it, we went into over 20 countries on a worldwide basis. Our sales started to climb at hospital level because in the orthopedic world, you have to pay distributors. We were over 40 million in sales, and that helped save the company pretty much in terms of getting profitability and getting the putting the money into resolving all the legal expenses that we had. So,
wow, that's amazing. So when you had this board meeting and you're going to lay off people 8 million, you probably looked at May 2011 as when it was all going to be over because the cash was going to run out. And instead, you were suddenly making money, cash flow positive, and at that kind of a run rate. That's very impressive.
Yeah, and eventually we got the lawsuit resolved in April of 2014. Once that was done, we immediately, by then the FDA was in a better spot. We had, in anticipation of resolving the lawsuit, we started our discussions with the FDA again, and they were in a much better spot and made the pivotal trial design and the process much easier. We initiated the pivotal trial. Well, we ended the lawsuit in April. We initiated a pivotal trial and did our first cases in June of 2014, completed it. The trial design that we eventually got was from the FDA was actually a gimme because the other previous ones were so complex. They made it easier. So we got the complete enrollment done in about 16 months. All the other companies did it in over 3 years. So that was at the end of the day a gimme. We completed the trial of enrollment, and then in the process, we were approached by strategics as well as potential investors, and then the board opted to sell the company in April of 2018. We sold off to Orthofix. The management team stayed on board for their 1-year transition, and I decided to, after that, to go and do something else. So it was enough for me after 16 years.
Yeah, well, that was an incredible tenure that you stuck with it, turned it around, and had such a great outcome. Thanks so much for that. So we've kind of covered everyone having a chance discussing the crisis that they faced and how they managed them. I'm going to open up the floor now. If anybody has any thoughts they'd like to add that have come up by what people have said so far, I'd like you to chime in. One thing I want to say is, yeah, it's pretty well known to those of us that have been in this industry for the decades we all have, that the FDA has its ups and downs, and there are periods that are very challenging, and then there are periods that are a little bit easier. We're fortunate that we're in a bit of an easier period now. So hopefully we get good timing with our submissions, but inevitably there'll be pushback, and the FDA will be more challenging in the future. So that's an issue that you can't control. You just have to navigate. But any other thoughts?
Well, one thing I would say is, going through for crisis management, like we had mentioned earlier, it's inevitable. Some of these, you can't necessarily predict, but something's going to happen, and kind of set up to expect the unexpected. And the reason we were able to make it through, there was, like I said, on a monthly or weekly basis, something relatively dramatic would happen, is to surround yourself with people who have gone through this a bunch and have developed a certain level of scar tissue and are comfortable working in that mode to be able to deal with it. It's hard on everyone. And after a while, you kind of expect it. And when you're expecting it, you can, I think, handle it a little bit more effectively.
That's a good point, and I think one example of expecting it is the transparency Tom used in letting all employees know what they were doing and showing them they're helping out the people who are leaving and keeping that communication going. I found in the companies I've been involved with, when there's good constant communication with everybody in the organization, when these crises show up, as opposed to what are we going to do, the response generally is, how can I help? So yeah, I think people with that background are ready to jump in and try to solve the problem, whatever comes up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would just chime. Oh, excuse me. I would just chime in that having people around the table in the investor pool who understand this regulated industry is also very helpful when these crises emerge, because it's hard enough to work through them, and to have investors who don't understand and or are not able to contribute meaningfully, when there are regulatory challenges, that makes it extra hard. So the selection of investors is an important feature as well. Sorry, go ahead.
No, great point, Eric. Thanks.
I concur with what everybody just said. I think, everybody doing a startup needs to anticipate that you will hit speed bumps, sometimes minor and sometimes major. But I think at the end of the day, it's how you handle those speed bumps is what the team's looking for and the investors are taking a look at. So from a team standpoint, I think, and you already know that, John, because you were also a consultant to Spinal Kinetics, I think being very open to people is critical. The employees typically that work in startups, they know the risk, but if you're open and sincere with them, they appreciate that. They'll take the bad news and process it and work with you. As a matter of fact, the 50% that we laid off, more than 50% of that came back at future dates because of the relationship that we developed with them over time. And that was the communication. And I think Eric also mentioned something that a lot of people forget about is the investors. There are investors or venture capitalists on my board that were from an operating background, and then there were other ones that didn't have the operating background. The ones that had the operating background had a totally different understanding. And I think you have to enlist those people, because the investors take a look at management sometimes in a different manner. They want to check against what they're saying to make sure that they're not self-serving. And so you have to have the investors that actually, or board members, even outside board members, that really understand what the impact is of whatever negative impact that you have or event that you got to deal with in a crisis, that they communicate to the non-operational people, because the understanding level is so different. It's to me, it's orders of magnitude different in terms of the communication. And you can't do it by yourself as a management team or a CEO or people from a regulatory or whatever the issue is. You have to make sure that other people help you. But at the end of the day, it comes down to pure communication, and with the employees, with the team, with the investors, and even ultimately with your customers. So making sure that you're very direct and honest with them always comes out in your favor at some point in time. People can deal with bad news if you're honest with them. That's my philosophy.
Well, great, Tom. Thanks for bringing that key point in. I agree with Eric. You need to have investors that understand the space, but even better if they've Tom saying operational, if they've run a company or two in the space, then they understand what you're going through and they can help you out. Great points. Well, I think we've reached the end of our session, but thanks everyone for your thoughtful contributions. This has been great. I've enjoyed your insights, and I think it's been beneficial for all the people who've been watching. And we've been streaming live on YouTube, so I'm sure a lot of people have gained a lot from the vast array of knowledge that we have arranged here. Thanks a lot, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.
Okay. Okay, thank you, John, for bringing us such a good roundtable this morning.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Appreciate you helping us get it going. See you soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, hi, Pavan.
Hi.
Hi, I'm wondering like there's only two of us here now. John wants to come in.
Yes. Right.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
I
Good to have you
want to
back.
come back because I want to hear what Pavan's going to announce.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. John, good to have you. I just wanted to sum up, right? We had a great, exciting day yesterday. Just taking a step back, we were deliberating a lot when we were thinking of taking GCS global. With the COVID situation developing, GCS always happened offsite. Then we said, like, let's go global and let's go online. And it was a huge challenge to figure out how do we structure this whole thing, and long weeks of work, and eventually it all ended up into a great show. Going back to yesterday's SVE online demo, we had great companies from different parts of the world. 7 companies we had coming from Singapore, UK, India, and USA. And we have 11 panel judges yesterday. That's a great panel. Diverse backgrounds, ex-founders, industry veterans. And I'm happy to have John today joining me on this. He was part of the panel yesterday.
Yeah.
Great pitches. Each of the startup had a great story. In fact, personally, I was surprised some of them had very good traction. I was under the impression they were early stage, but a couple of the startups had revenues in terms of millions of dollars. So listening to their pitches, listening to their stories, listening to the space they are working on, especially 5 of them came from the core of health tech, and their ideas are very disruptive. And the way they are scaling, the way they are getting the traction is extremely impressive. And based on the judges' feedback, based on the judges' evaluation, and we felt the best pitch or the best startup was Fable
Fable Care.
Care. Sorry,
Yeah.
thanks, Catherine. Fable Care, and they had a great story. It connected with most of us, and they were operating in a space which is very relevant in a mass market like India. They were helping in the core healthcare sector, and we felt they were the best. So I take this opportunity to announce that People Care was the best pitch of yesterday, and I congratulate them. John, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, Pavan, that's great news. I agree with you. Not only was it an impressive group and hard to pare down and make a selection for the winner, but they were showing traction not just with their fundraising, but with their revenue growth. I mean, as you said, a lot of these early companies have gone pretty far and are growing revenue already. So it was a very impressive group. I'm excited about the potential all of them have for success. But yeah, I'm excited to hear that Fable Care is our winner this year. It was a well done presentation and really great business opportunity. So thanks for chairing it, and then thanks for having me as one of the panelists.
Okay, thanks, John. Also, I just want to share with the audience that all the presentations of yesterday have been updated into our SV channel on the YouTube. I mean, the same channel where you are watching this live. You can go by each presentation, judges' introduction, and also judges gave great feedback yesterday after all the pitches were complete. I mean, it's worth watching. I think I would encourage all the entrepreneurs, founders, or those who are on the sidelines wanting to launch something. I mean, yesterday's 2-hour session was a great event, and you should go back to our YouTube channel and watch those videos. They are very informative, very useful, and would give you a lot of ideas. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you back again for the next session. And in a couple of minutes, I think we'll have more content coming in. And in the meantime, you can always go through the videos we already uploaded fresh into the YouTube channel. Thank you.
Okay, so should we send an email to the rest of judges and founder?
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Okay,
Right.
I'll just
Thanks.
announce winners Fable Care, and thanks for everyone's coming.